Hello everyone, welcome to Alakai Beki. Today's video is about warrior women and mighty queens, specifically the warrior women and mighty queens of the Mongol Empire, whom I call the Tigresses of the Steppe. Um, and the reason for this video is because often when one hears about the Mongol Empire, their minds immediately go to of course, Chinggis Khan, more commonly known as Genghis Khan, though that's not correct pronunciation, the founder of the Mongol Empire, as well as other individuals such as Kublai Khan and Timur Ilang or Tamerlane, often leaving the warrior women and queens of the Mongol Empire at the wayside, which is a great disservice to them because they were just as important, if not more important, to the development of the Mongol Empire and its preservation, as well as the preservation of its history. So, one thing to also mention, oftentimes when people hear about and think about warrior women, especially in the modern day, we think about specific individuals. In one case, specifically in England, but in other places in Europe, we have Boudica, also known as Boadicea, depending on your pronunciation, who was a Celtic queen of the Iceni tribe in Britannia or the modern day UK, and roughly 44 CE or AD, depending on which measurement system you want to use, who gathered a coalition of Celtic tribes in a valiant effort to drive out the Roman Empire from the island of Britannia during the reign of Emperor Nero, before she was put down by the Roman army. And then, even more commonly, we have the individual on the right, Hua Mulan, known to be very famous because of the two different Mulan movies that Disney put out over the past 30 years. And she's a stereotypical Chinese warrior woman. And I say that because while she is definitely in the Chinese historical and literary record, there are others besides her, some even older, but she is the one we know most commonly, specifically because of those Disney movies. And again, because of individuals like Boudica and Huanglan, other warrior women and cultures that have warrior women are often left on the wayside, um, especially the subjects of this video, the Mongol warrior women. So to understand the rise of these warrior women, we must go to an area of Eurasia, Europe and Asia. Europe and Asia are not separate continents; they're one continent called the Eurasian steppe. A area of grassland similar to, but not quite the same as, the Great Plains of North America, and that ranges from roughly the Hungarian Plain and the Caspian Steppe in Ukraine, which is still part of Central Asia, in the west, all the way to the Eastern Steppe in Mongolia and Manchuria in the east. In this region of Eurasia, has very few resources. It's essentially just a wide grassland that, again, as the name would say, is predominantly filled with grass and is relatively arid, though it does have a variety of rivers, as you can see on this map, as well as a lot of flora and fauna, like, well, for one thing, pine trees, because they border the taiga forests, as well as deer and rabbits and other things, marmots. And so, because of the lack of resources, or the very few resources present, um, more egalitarian societies, as opposed to the societies in China or the Roman Empire and such, um, began to develop in the Eurasian steppe, making tribes such as the Scythians, who are where we get the Amazons from, the Huns and the Mongols, much more equal, having much more equality between men and women than a lot of other regions, though not all, because we have the most of, though not all, but still most of the indigenous tribes of the Americas, who were actually matriarchal societies, as well as many tribes in Africa that were also matriarchal societies. And so, because of this greater equality between men and women in these steppe societies, um, warrior women began to develop. Again, the Amazons are a prime example of this. And this was because you needed everyone in the society to contribute to the gathering and preservation of resources. This was no different with the founding of the Mongol Empire. So, before the founding of the Mongol Empire, what is now modern-day Mongolia and northeast China, as well as parts of southeastern Russia, was divided between various tribes that were vying for power. Among them were the Liao that eventually founded the Khitan Liao dynasty, a very powerful dynasty in what is now modern northeast China and Mongolia, but also other tribes such as the Mongol tribe, the Naiman tribes, the Orit tribes, the Merkid tribes, the Karyots, the Tartars, etc. And they, for centuries, vied for power, and occasionally, like the Khitan Liao, as well as earlier ones such as the Xianbei and such, which will come in a later video, would unite in a confederation. So it's not surprising that an individual such as Chinggis Khan, more commonly known again as Genghis Khan, but not properly known, would rise and eventually unite around 1127 CE the various tribes. Sorry, he would unite them later on in the 1180s and such, but still unite the various tribes, creating a unified Mongol kingdom. However, he did not do this alone or in a vacuum. Now, of course, he had other help from individuals such as his generals and friends, Subutai Batar, Jebenoyon, Subutai's older brother Jelm, and Borte, another general, and others. But those were not the only advisors he had. In fact, Chinggis Khan greatly relied on many of the women in his life. Two of the most important were his mother, Hoelun, and his wife and primary wife and the love of his life, at least according to the historical sources, Borte. So Hoelun was the mother of Chinggis Khan. She would have originally known him as Temujin, his birth name, and various other sons, including his youngest brother, Timur. Originally, she was a member of a different tribe before Temujin's father, Yuan kidnapped her, as was the custom of the time. So a custom, not the only custom. Part of the customs of the time would be to raid a tribe to kidnap a woman to be your wife, rather than arranging marriage, which also did happen as well. And therefore, taking her as his wife, where she would eventually father Temujin and his brothers. And such. Unfortunately, very early on in Temujin's life, Chinggis's life, Yuan, his father, would be assassinated by a rival tribe. And in the aftermath of his assassination, Temujin's tribe and Hoelun's tribe would abandon them. They would essentially decide to just leave them to fend for themselves, leaving Hoelun with her sons, as well as the two half-sons from Yuan first life. And during this time, Hoelun would become the matriarch and would lead their family through the struggle, helping them survive. Of course, this would not be a time without strife, as the brothers, as often siblings do, would fight and conflict. In fact, the two eldest half-brothers would eventually try to usurp Temujin's role as the oldest of his full-blooded siblings, causing a feud that eventually ended with Temujin and his eldest full brother assassinating their eldest half brother. But they would spare the second eldest half brother. And because of this conflict and this murder, Hoelun would become furious, and so she gathered all of her children and the surviving half son, surviving half brother of Temujin, and would essentially do, according to the sources, one of the most common uh, things that you can find in the historic sources, and that is um, she would take an arrow and break it and say, "Look, see, this here is weak. This arrow I was able to easily break by itself." And then she would tie a bunch of arrows together and try to break it, and couldn't do it. And she said, "These arrows together are strong. Be like these arrows. Be united." Which, again, as I said, is one of the most common things you'll find in any historical records, because you find it in the accounts of Tecumseh uniting the various tribes and various other people in Europe and Africa and such as well. But still, she, using this tactic in speech, at least according to the Secret History of the Mongols, the oldest official historical source we have about Chinggis's Mongol Empire, would reunite her children. And because of her wisdom, eventually, after Chinggis united all of the Mongol tribes and began his conquests, he would keep his mother Hoelun on as an advisor. And in fact, she was such an influential advisor and powerful member of his cabinet, of his inner circle, that when Temujin, Chinggis Khan, eventually began to fall under the sway of a corrupt member of his cabinet, of his inner circle, Ted Tingri, a shaman whom he had taken in as one of his inner circle early on in his unification of the Mongols, of the Mongol tribes. Temujin began to ignore what Ted Tingri was doing. Ted Tingri was a bully and corrupt and actually wanted power for himself, at least according to the sources. And according to all the extant sources, the Yuan Shi, the history of the Yuan dynasty, Juvayni, Ata-Malik, as well as the Secret History of the Mongols, Ted Tingri was going around and beating the crap out of not only Chinggis's brothers, but also Chinggis's eldest sons. Eventually, and he was ignoring all the warning signs from all of his brothers and sons, and even his other members of his inner circle, until Hoelun, his mother, hearing about it, again became furious and marched into Chinggis's royal tent and chewed his ear off. According to the record, she even pulled out her breast and said, "Look at this. I fed you from this breast and grew you. And I grew your brothers," and basically said, "This is ridiculous. You are going to listen to me now," etc., etc. Apparently, scaring him straight and leading to Chinggis to realize the error of his ways, and realized that he had been ignoring all the warning signs. And then he promptly had his youngest brother, Temujin, kill Ted Tingri in a wrestling match by breaking Ted Tingri's back, showing just the amount of authority and influence and fear, apparently, that Chinggis had, that Chinggis's mother had over her son, that Hoelun had over Chinggis, that she was one of the only people that he would listen to in certain instances. Very similarly, we have the case of his wife, Borte. So Borte and Chinggis met when they were very young. They met when Yuan, Chinggis's father, was taking him to actually a different village than Borte lived in to try and find him a wife. And they stopped in Borte's village for the night for food and shelter. And during this time, apparently, Borte and Temujin met and sort of took a liking to each other, as well as the chief of this village convinced Yuan to pick a bride for Temujin, Chinggis's birth name, from among the young girls. Temujin was around 11 at the time in the village. And this contest was supposedly based off of how good their feet looked. And the one Temujin picked out was Borte. But of course, there's evidence that Borte essentially picked him out first during their initial meetings. Unfortunately for these two betrothed, after Temujin left to return to his village with his father, Yuan would be assassinated. And so for about a decade, they would not see each other again until in his late teens and early 20s, Temujin would go and finally reclaim her as his bride and bring her to live with him and his family at their small little living unit. Unfortunately, again, as was part of the custom at the time, a rival tribe known as the Merkid would raid their living community and take Borte as the bride of one of the members of the Merkid tribe. Normally, as was the case with the individual that Yuan stole Hoelun from, they would essentially write the individual who was the husband would essentially write off the bride and go find a new one. Temujin did not do this. He became furious and went to two powerful individuals in his life. First was the Kahn, a powerful a chief of one of the most powerful tribes in the Mongolian steppe, and his patron, as well as his sworn brother, Jomaka, a chief of another powerful tribe, and would gather an army and go and reclaim Borte, keeping her as his primary his first and most important wife for the rest of his life, cementing how much they loved each other. Because again, she picked him out first. Then also essentially igniting the events that would lead to Genghis Khan, Temujin eventually uniting the Mongol tribes into the united Mongol kingdom and eventually empire. But it didn't stop here, because much like Hoelun, Borte would become one of the key advisors to Genghis Khan's in his empire. And in fact, oftentimes when he went on campaign, he would leave not his other longtime friends, Jebe Noyon, Jelm, Subutai, Borchu, etc., in charge. He would leave his wife, Borte, in charge of these state affairs, just showing just how important she was to him and to the running of the Mongol Empire. Furthermore, she was also the one who ran their household. As was the custom of the time among a lot of men, and among a lot of communities and cultures at the time, men and women could take on multiple spouses. And Chinggis took on several spouses who were subservient to Borte. Essentially, they were lesser in rank. And a couple of times, according to the secret history of the Mongols, he would try and cement and consummate these marriages in the ger, not yurt. Mongolian tents are called gers, not yurts, that he and Borte lived in. And she would, both times, kicked him out, saying, "No, you're not going to do this in here. You're going to leave." Showing that, again, she ruled the household. So showing just how powerful she was. So with the unification of the Mongol Empire, Genghis Khan would spread out and conquer other regions, such as the Jin dynasty in what is now modern-day northeast China, eastern Russia and Korea and such, all the way into the Persian Khwarezmian Empire. But because of these conquests, Chinggis would make a lot of enemies. And this is where our next warrior woman comes in. Because according to the secret history of the Mongols, one of these enemies was the Tartar tribe. To be fair, Genghis didn't like the Tartar tribe either, because they were the tribe who assassinated his father, and he essentially killed every man of fighting age and incorporated the rest into various other tribes. And because of this intense hate between the Tartars and Chinggis, eventually a Tartar man would enter the tent that Hoelun and that Hoelun was watching Chinggis's youngest son, Khutulun. And the Tartar pulled out a knife and took Tolu hostage. Fortunately for Tolu, there was a young woman in this ger named Altani. And Altani, seeing what was happening, tackled the Tartar and held him down and saved Tolu, and held him down until Jebe and Jelm, two of Chinggis's top advisors and generals, came and took the Tartar captive. And in fact, Jebe and Jelm tried to take credit for saving Tolu, but Chinggis Khan, recognizing what had happened, recognizing that it was in fact Altani who was the one who had saved his son, also Altani speaking up, saying, "No, I'm the one who saved him, not you guys." Chinggis would bestow upon Altani the title of Batar, or hero, a title that individuals such as Subutai, his best general, would hold, just showing how important she was. And then, of course, she would also eventually marry to one of his key generals. The name of the general is escaping me. So, not only was it just Borte and Hoelun, it was also individuals not of royal birth, such as Altani, whom Chinggis saw as very important, and who were individuals who prove just how fearsome Mongol women could be, and just also proves that they could obtain statuses of heroes and be recognized for their valor as well. Then we come to one of Chinggis's daughters, an individual known as Alakai Beki, not to be mistaken for Becky like the English name Becky. She was his, I believe, eldest daughter, and he placed her in charge of the one of the tribes he had conquered, the Ongud tribe. And he did this with his other daughters as well, placed them in key roles of administration. However, the Ongud tribe at the time was not at all happy that she was placed in charge. And in fact, they didn't like a Chinggisid in charge of them at all, and they tried to start a rebellion. Alakai Beki, the daughter of Chinggis Khan, would warn her father of this, and he would quickly put the rebellion down. But it didn't stop there, because Chinggis, he had in his mind, well, they started a rebellion, he was going to do essentially what he did to the Tatars, and kill every man of fighting age, and then incorporate the rest into the other tribes. But Alakai Beki stepped in and said, "No, don't do that. Let's be merciful to them." And because of this mercy that Alakai Beki showed them, for one thing, Chinggis Khan listened to her. He took her advice and decided not to punish them as severely as he was going to. And because of this mercy that Alakai Beki placed on the Onguds, she was immediately accepted back into the Ongud tribe, at least according to the sacred history of the Mongols. The secret history of the Mongols. But again, it didn't just stop here. After this, as the Mongol Empire began to expand, Alakai Beki put in place many of the administrative methods that would eventually be used by the later Mongol Empire. Furthermore, she helped strengthen communication networks and sort of had a monopoly on the trade that was going on in the region. She became a very powerful individual in the Mongol Empire, thanks to, one, ingratiating herself into the Ongud tribe, but also thanks to the trust and the responsibilities that Chinggis Khan put her on. Essentially, the responsibilities that Chinggis Khan gave his eldest daughter. Now we move on to the height of the Mongol Empire. So at its height, the Mongol Empire stretched from Korea uh, and the southern half of Russia, including what is now modern day Ukraine and Russia and Belarus and etc., as well as Ukraine and Bulgaria and parts of Poland and Hungary in the west, to Korea, Mongolia, and China in the east. A massive empire. And during its height, we saw the reign. We see the reign of very powerful Khans, such as very powerful Hans, such as the sort of middle child of Chinggis Khan, Ogedei Khan, Ogedei Khan's son Goyuk, and his nephew Monkey Khan. But while these individuals were powerful and influential in their own right, they too relied on powerful Mongol women. The first of these was Torgane, the wife of Ogedei Khan and the father of Goyuk Khan. She was one of the, like Borte and Hoelun, was one of the key advisors of Ogedei Khan, and helped him decide affairs of state, and held a great amount of influence on the Mongol Empire as a whole. So much so that when Ogedei Khan died, Torgane was made sure that her son Goyuk was elected as Han before any of the other Mongol princes could come to what is known as a Kurultai, essentially sort of a parliamentary, democratic, but more parliamentary method of deciding who would be the next Han. It was only key generals and members of the royal family could attend. And she made sure that Goyuk Khan, what her son, was elected, and then continued to be the key advisor and one of the main influencers of Goyuk Khan throughout his reign. At the same time, there was an individual who was the primary rival of Torgane Khutulun, and that was Sorgatani Beki, the mother of Monkey Khan. And she was even more powerful than Torgane. Sorgatani had actually even been offered to be another bride of Ogedei Khan, but she refused. And after the death of Ogedei Khan, and eventually the death of Goyuk Khan, Sorgatani Beki, in a similar way, but also much more brutal way, to Torgane's, making sure that Goyuk Khan got a hold of the Khanate, Sorgatani Beki would make an alliance with the powerful Batu Khan, another grandson of Chinggis Khan, the son of Chinggis Khan's oldest son, Jochi, and the powerful ruler of the Golden Horde, or the Kipchak Khanate, the westernmost half, one of the two westernmost halves of the Mongol Empire, and made an alliance with him. And together with Batu Khan, Sorgatani Beki would take it upon herself to install her eldest son, Monkey Khan, as Khan of the Mongol Empire. And during this, she and Batu would purge essentially would purge the Chagatai and the Ogedei, Chagatai and Ogedei being two other sons of Chinggis Khan, along with Tulu and Jochi, would purge the Chagatai and Ogedei families, almost completely wiping them out, though the Chagatai families would escape to Central Asia as well, effectively instilling the power of the Jochid and Tuluid families in the Mongol Empire. And much like Torgane, Sorgatani Beki would be one of the key advisors of Monkey Khan, throughout his reign, and would be one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, individuals in the Mongol Empire at the time, with the exception of Marquis Han, who himself was a very powerful and authoritative figure, as well as Batu Han. However, this unification of the Mongol Empire would eventually come to a sort of end, as with the death of Marquis Han and the election of Kublai Khan, the empire would split into four different Khanates. The Khanate of the Great Khan, ruled by Kublai Khan, the Chagadai Khanate, the Golden Horde, or the Kipchak Horde, the Kipchak Khanate, and the Il Khanate. And this was because Kublai Khan essentially took the throne, along with his brother Hoelun Khan of the Il Khanate, would take the throne for themselves, while the other sides, the Chochid, the Kipchak Khanate, the Golden Horde, and the Chagadai Khanate, would not view him as legitimate, therefore causing a period of civil war. Many academics claim that this was in fact the dissolution of the Mongol Empire. I disagree because, for example, the Roman Empire split into the Western and Eastern Roman Empire, and people don't say that the Roman Empire ended with that. So why would you do the same thing with the Mongol Empire? But regardless of that, this was a time of great civil war between, especially the Golden Horde, the Kipchak Khanate, and the Il Khanate, and the Chagadai Khanate, and the Khanate of the Great Khan, of the Great Han. And during this time, two of the primary individuals in this war were the Han of the Chagadai Khanate, Kaidu, and the very famous Kublai Han. But while these are the two main people that two main figures that people think about when they think about the warfare between Kublai Khan and the other Khanates, one individual was just as important, or if not more important, and that is the individual of Khutulun, the daughter of Kaidu, who was a very skilled warrior. In fact, so skilled that now you can pause and read all of this. I'm not going to read it all, but and I'll move it some so that you can read the other, the last page over here to the right. Essentially, according to individuals such as Marco Polo, Khutulun was the best warrior that was in Kaidu's army. She is called by Marco Polo as Ahioric, but Khutulun is the most common name, so that's what I'm going to use. And because she was such a skilled warrior, but also so beautiful, she decided that before she would marry, somebody would have to beat her in a wrestling match. And time after time, individuals would come and try and win her hand in marriage. And she would beat them every time in the wrestling match until she gained over 10,000 horses, including one point in time where an individual came with over 1,000 horses and challenged her to a wrestling match where essentially if he won, he would gain her as a bride, but if she won, she would get all 1,000s of his horses. And while this was the closest of his of her wrestling matches, again, I'm moving this around so you can pause and read all of it, she still won. And this actually came at sort of the annoyance of her father, Kaidu, and her mother, who wanted her to lose because she still had yet to gain a spouse. But she chose to win anyway, absolutely refusing to lose. Now, it is stated in by the Muslim historian and Mongol advisor Rashid al-Dun in his accounts, which unfortunately are not in English anywhere that I can find, so I wasn't able to use it, but I will cite sources that mention it, and that have it cited in their sources. Uh, she did eventually uh, sort of cave into her parents and try to marry the Han of the Ilkhanate at the time, Ghazan, the grandson of Hulu. But nothing really came of it. And then eventually, supposedly, it's hard to corroborate whether or not this actually happened because it's only mentioned by Rashid al-Din. An individual tried to assassinate her father, but was stopped, and eventually she and that individual chose to marry. Regardless of whether or not that happened, she was undefeated in any wrestling match, gaining 10,000 horses, and is described by Marco Polo. When the Kaidu would go to war with Kublai, the individual who stood out the most and was the most skilled of his warriors was Khutulun, was his daughter Ayura. Ayura. I'm just going to call Khutulun. I'm sorry for any mispronunciation and butchering that, but Khutulun, who would at any point in time break off from her father's army, rush into the fray, grab a specific individual, and bring them back to her father as a captive. And apparently, she did this constantly through battle, making her feared. In fact, Marco Polo says that she was like a hawk or a bird of prey in doing this. Like she would swoop in like a bird of prey into the fray and just snatch somebody up, making her very renowned and very feared throughout the forces of Hubei Han and the other rival tribes and Hanates of Kaidu's Shakunai Hanate. Oh, where's her movie? I want to say that before moving on to the next slide. Where's her movie? We see Mulan all the time. I want to see this person's movie. I want to see a movie about Hoelun. Anyways, so unfortunately, oh yes, and this is, as I said, she did eventually try to marry Ghazan, the Han of the Ilkhanate, but again, nothing really came of that, really from anything. Eventually, despite this period of civil war between the various Hanates ending, and trade through Eurasia opening up because of the Silk Road, the Mongol Empire would actually begin to disintegrate. First, with the Ilkhanate that would dissolve into civil war in 1250 CE, and then eventually the overthrowing of the Yuan dynasty by the Ming Chinese Empire in 1368, leaving only the Chagai Hanate, the Golden Horde, the Kipchak Hanate, as well as what became known as the Northern Yuan dynasty in Mongolia. Before eventually they too, such as the Kipchak Golden Horde, would devolve into various other Hanates, such as the Kazan Hanate, the Siberian Hanate, and the most powerful of them, the Crimean Hanate, as well as the Chagatai Hanate, eventually becoming the Timurid dynasty, after the Mongol general Timur would try to rebuild the Mongol Empire, and created the Timurid dynasty. And for a while, the Northern Yuan dynasty would stay intact. However, eventually, the last of the princes, the last of the sort of grandsons of Kublai Han would die, just making the Mongol Northern Yuan dynasty dissolve into various different tribes again. And during this time of disunion, an individual known as Manduhai would come into prominence. She was a very powerful individual, the daughter of a powerful chieftain named Mandul. I apologize to any Mongolians. I apologize to any Mongolians who are watching for any possible mispronunciation. And she, after her father Mandul died, she inherited a powerful tribe in her own. In fact, she was so renowned and so sought after that many warlords actually tried to gain her hand in marriage. However, rather than becoming subservient or becoming essentially just the arm candy, eye candy of these warlords, Manduhai gathered various tribes together and went in search of one of the a descendant of Kublai Khan and Chinggis Khan, eventually finding a new individual that she would name Dayan Han. The individual was a boy, and this was not out of nowhere. Uh, there had been rumors that the son, the daughter of the last descendant of Kublai Khan had sent her child away for safety before it had been conquered by one of these warlords. And so she was not going off of nothing. Manduhai did have some idea of where this child might be. And so, with her small confederation of Mongol warriors, she found the child and took him on as her betrothed. And together, Manduhai and Dayan Han, as he would eventually become known, would reunify the Mongol tribes, rebuilding the Northern Yuan dynasty. And together, they would successfully raid the Ming dynasty several times. And it should be noted that neither was subservient to the other. Manduhai was a very skilled and powerful warrior in her own right. In fact, even in her own age, she was so respected that in one battle, according to the primary document for this time period, the Altan Tobchi, which I will have in my sources. I can't exactly cite it like I usually do in Chicago style citation because it's in Cyrillic, but I will have the link to it in the sources. I apologize. But anyways, according to the Altan Tobchi, during a battle, during the battle to reunify the Northern Yuan dynasty, during the battle to reunify the Yuan dynasty, Manduhai would apparently fell off her horse during battle. And rather than just sort of leaving her to her own devices, her elite guard surrounded her and protected her and picked her up and put her back on the horse. So they essentially surrounded her with a protective guard during a large-scale battle and made sure that she was safe and put back on her horse. And then she promptly led them to victory. So, very important individual. And again, she and Dayan Han would eventually reunite the various tribes in what is now modern day Mongolia, as well as parts of Manchuria and Kazakhstan and such, reforming the Northern Yuan and constantly raiding successfully the Ming dynasty. Unfortunately, despite how influential Dayan Han and Manduhai were, the Mongol Northern Yuan dynasty would dissolve again during the reign of their son, the Boyle Kahn, I believe is his name. Eventually causing due to essentially a inheritance dispute, the empire would split. However, their grandson, because of how powerful and influential Manduhai Han was, and the institutions that she put forward, essentially, she and Dayan Khan divided the empire between their children. They were the main rulers, but they divided their empire between their children. So they put one of their sons in charge of each part of the empire as sort of a defensive perimeter. So because of that, the grandson of Manduhai and Dayan Han, Altan Han, would reunify using these defensive regions, at least half of Mongolia under his reign. Uh, and he would again successfully raid multiple times into the Ming Dynasty. In fact, reaching Beijing, the capital of the Ming Dynasty, and burning much of the city to the ground. As well as he was the one who, with the help of various Tibetan Buddhist lamas, would create or discover, depending on how you want to look at it, the Dalai Lama. And I say discover because the idea is the Dalai Lama had already existed. The one that Altan, Kahn, and the Tibetan Lama had discovered was just the fourth one, but it was the first of the four supposed Dalai Lamas that had been given the title of Dalai Lama or Ocean Teacher. And that was because of the Altan Khan. And again, none of this could have happened without the reunification commenced and completed by Manduhai and Dayan Han, but again, specifically Manduhai Han. So there you have it. Whether you look at Chinggis Khan's mother, Hoelun, and his wife, Borte, or the hero Altani Batar, who saved Chinggis's youngest son, Tulu, or his daughter, Alakai Beki, who created a monopoly of trade and created the institutions that would make up the Mongol Empire, or powerhouses of the Mongol Empire politics like Torganay and Sorgatani Beki, warrior women like Khutulun and Manduhai. The Mongol Empire's history is built upon the bedrock of mighty queens and warrior women. And if we, to continue to ignore this, as I said at the beginning of the video, is a disservice to not only these women in the Mongol Empire, but to all warrior women overall. So with that, I'm going to end the video. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you want me to cover any other subjects in the future, remember to like, share, and subscribe.